we take seriously the responsibility to preserve it. We are NTD.
Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. Our stories today: President Trump warning of heavy force if protests spread to this weekend's parade in Washington. He again alleges professional agitators in Los Angeles protests as Marines get there to assist security efforts. The U.S. and China are meeting for a second day of trade talks today in London. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick discusses the progress. House leadership tees up for a vote on more government budget cuts. What does House Speaker Mike Johnson have to say? We have the latest from Capitol Hill. 2 Israeli ministers are facing sanctions from 5 different countries, including the UK and Canada. Why the 5 nations say the ministers are inciting violence and how Israel is responding. A school shooting in Austria leaves at least 10 people dead. Local police say a number of wounded are being treated. We have the update.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. Unrest in Los Angeles is entering its 5th day, and now the federal response is increasing. President Trump mobilized 700 Marines and an additional 2,000 National Guard troops overnight. Meanwhile, state leaders are pushing back. Here's the latest.
President Trump is ordering another 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles. The Pentagon confirmed this Monday after California Governor Gavin Newsom posted about it on X. Newsom condemned the move, calling it reckless, pointless, and disrespectful to our troops. He said all but 300 guardsmen were, quote, sitting unused in federal buildings without orders. Trump has also ordered the deployment of around 700 U.S. Marines, but without invoking the Insurrection Act, their powers remain limited. They can only defend federal buildings and personnel, but are not authorized to make arrests or enforce the law. Meanwhile, Newsom is deploying more than 800 additional state and local officers to the streets of Los Angeles. Attorney General Pam Bondi says the FBI has identified a suspect who assaulted a federal officer during the riots. The suspect is accused of throwing rocks at federal officers, injuring one, and damaging vehicles in Paramount.
That guy has just been identified, and they are doing a search warrant on his house as we speak. So you can run, you can't hide. We are coming after you federally. If you assault a police officer, if you rob a store, if you loot, if you spit on a police officer, we're coming after you.
FBI Director Kash Patel issued a blunt warning Saturday, saying those who attack law enforcement will be prosecuted, no exceptions. Some Democrats, including Senator John Fetterman, are condemning the violence outright. This comes after reports of cars set on fire in assaults on law enforcement, which Fetterman called, quote, anarchy and true chaos. He said Monday the Democratic Party loses the moral high ground if it doesn't speak up. Federal officials, meanwhile, are alleging the protests are being funded and professionally coordinated. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem made these allegations Monday on Fox News.
These are organized. These are people that are being paid to do this. You can follow how they behave, the signals they give to each other in these crowds and these protests to instigate violence. This is an operation, and it's professionally done. They've done it before, and we're going to stop it and make sure that we prosecute every single one of them.
Noem also made a social media post saying the rioters would not stop federal immigration enforcement. She said ICE would continue to enforce the law.
President Trump doubles down the need for federal intervention as he deploys active duty Marines and more National Guard to Los Angeles. He's also warning of heavy force if protests spread to this weekend's military parade in Washington. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good afternoon, Iris. What's the president's latest comments today on Los Angeles protests?
Good evening, good afternoon to you as well, Dawn. So as the president sends about 700 active duty Marines, as well as doubles the number of National Guards to LA now to 4,000. President Trump this morning again defended his move, saying that it's necessary as Democratic leaders there are not doing enough to contain the situation, and that if it didn't make the move, Los Angeles will be burning as it was burning a few months ago during the wildfires. And that comes despite California Governor Gavin Newsom, as well as the Democratic LA mayor, again criticizing President Trump, saying that the troops are not needed and that Trump did it without their approval. Here's what Trump said in the Oval Office. Watch.
You have to remember, I've been here before, and I went right by every rule, and I waited for governors to say, send in the National Guard. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it, and they just wouldn't do it. It kept going on and on, got worse and worse. And in Minneapolis, that city was burning down 7 days. And I said to myself, if that stuff happens again, we've got to make faster decisions.
And while President Trump has activated those troops, he has not invoked the Insurrection Act. And without doing that, active duty troops cannot perform law enforcement duties on U.S. soil. And for now, they're mainly performing duties to protect federal agents as well as federal buildings, which administration says are under increased threat. And today in the Oval Office, President Trump was again asked about if he will invoke the Insurrection Act. He says he will certainly do it if there is an insurrection. And when asked what amounts to one, he says there were certain parts of Los Angeles last night that, quote, you could have called it an insurrection. And he further again alleged that there were trained and professional insurrectionists amid the protests, citing their actions, for example, like breaking the curb as well as handing pieces of granite to other protesters. Here's what he said. Watch.
And these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. They're agitators. They're paid. Do you think somebody walks up to a curb and starts hammering pieces out, has all the equipment necessary, and starts handing it out to people to use as a weapon?
Meanwhile, today, Pentagon officials estimated that a total troop deployment to LA as of now will cost about $134 million. Don.
And as well, Iris, President Trump is speaking later today at Fort Bragg. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So he's on his way there right now. That Fort Bragg is located in North Carolina. He's heading there with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and will be joined there by veterans, active duty military members, as well as their families. And that's part of the bigger celebrations of America's Army's 250th birthday, which will culminate this weekend with a grand military parade right here in Washington, D.C. And speaking just now in the Oval Office, President Trump gave a warning, saying that if there are protesters trying to disrupt this weekend celebration right here, they will be met with, quote, heavy force. Watch.
Those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force.
And after more ceremony and celebrations this afternoon, President Trump is slated to speak at around 4 p.m. Local time at the event at Fort Bragg. So we do expect to hear more from the president later today. Back to you, Don.
All right, Iris, thank you very much. The U.S. Army's 250th anniversary is coming up this weekend, and preparations are underway in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands are expected in the nation's capital. The celebration this Saturday includes an Army birthday party at the National Mall. It will culminate with a parade through the Capitol and an enlistment ceremony presided over by the president. Security preparations include more than 18 miles of anti-scale fencing, 17 miles of concrete barriers, and 175 metal detectors. There will also be drones operated by the Secret Service. The Army is bringing 6,500 troops into Washington, along with 150 vehicles and 50 aircraft for the event. There will also be aircraft flyovers and fireworks. The FAA will close down arrivals and departures at Washington's National Airport during the peak of the celebration. The event coincides with President Trump's 79th birthday. The Secret Service says thousands of agents, officers, and specialists will be deployed from across the country for security.
The Secret Service and our partners want every attendee to be confident in their security and feel safe. That is why we are leaving no stone unturned.
We're expecting families, we're expecting some children. Parents, take a picture of your children that morning so we know what they look like in the event you get separated. You can easily show the officer the picture. We'll have family reunification tents, and we'll have officers everywhere you look on hand to assist.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense today. Lawmakers are questioning him on several topics. These include the military's deployment to Los Angeles during ongoing riots. Here's a clip of what Hegseth said.
How much are these deployments going to cost for both the Marines and the National Guard? And what training or duties are not taking place because of these deployments? Where in your limited budget, sir, are you going to find, in the remainder of this fiscal year, are you going to pull the money to cover these deployments? What holes are being created?
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for the question. You are right. We are both originally from Minnesota, which is why I recall 2020 quite well, when Governor Walz abandoned a police precinct and allowed it to be burned to the ground. And also allowed 5 days of chaos to occur inside the streets of Minneapolis. The police precinct, ma'am, was abandoned and burned to the ground. And because of that, the National Guard was eventually far too late mobilized. And President Trump recognizes a situation like that, improperly handled by a governor, like it was by Governor Walz, if it gets out of control, is a bad situation for the citizens of any location. So in Los Angeles, we believe that ICE, which is a federal law enforcement agency, has the right to safely conduct operations in any state and any jurisdiction in the country, especially after 21 million illegals have crossed our border under the previous administration. ICE ought to be able to do its job, whether it's Minneapolis or Los Angeles.
I have limited time. I asked a budget
and they
question. Could the Secretary please address the budget? Thank you.
You asked about the situation in Los Angeles, and we believe ICE agents should be allowed to be safe in doing their operations, and we have deployed National Guard and the Marines to protect them in the execution of their duties. We've got a 13% increase in our defense budget, and we will have the capability to cover down on contingencies, which is something the National Guard and the Marine plan for. So we have the funding to cover down on contingencies, especially ones as important as maintaining law and order in a major American city.
Lawmakers also questioned Hegseth about the department's requested budget for next year. This was the first time Hegseth appeared in front of Congress since his confirmation hearings were held in January. The protests in Los Angeles have now sparked a nationwide wave of demonstrations against immigration raids. In Texas, demonstrators took to the streets last night. In Dallas and Austin, police deployed tear gas and arrested several protesters in Austin. In Dallas, aerial footage showed protesters blocking traffic and facing off with police. Local media reports say the protests were held in solidarity with demonstrators in Los Angeles. Other demonstrations were reported in California, in Santa Ana, and San Francisco. Roughly 150 people were arrested on Sunday. In New York City, police say they made arrests outside federal buildings during anti-ICE protests yesterday. In Atlanta, local news outlets showed a crowd gathered outside an ICE building demanding the release of detainees. Similar cases played out in Louisville and cities across the Northeast as labor leaders demanded the release of union organizer David Horta, who was detained during the LA protests. Questions are being asked in Washington about who instigated these protests and if foreign money is involved. In a statement to media outlet Just the News yesterday, FBI Director Kash Patel said the Bureau is investigating the financial connections behind these widespread demonstrations. Patel said that the FBI is looking into all monetary ties linked to the riots. Just the News cited former FBI Executive Assistant Director Krish Paiholta, saying that the agency likely began looking immediately into how these violent protests were triggered. The first protests following immigration raids last week were largely peaceful. Many demonstrations turned violent over the weekend. The report said that one of the groups involved in the Los Angeles riots was called the Party for Socialist Liberation. It's a Marxist group with alleged links to the Chinese Communist Party. The news website reported the organization was also behind some of the anti-Israel protests across university campuses. And joining us now to discuss the protests and riots in Los Angeles is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and host of Can We Please Talk podcast. Also joining us is Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good afternoon, Tony. Good afternoon to you, Mike. Tony, I'll start with you today. Now, some local officials are saying that the protests, while disruptive, were largely manageable until federal forces arrived. Do you think, in your opinion, sending in the National Guard and Marines, was that necessary to prevent widespread violence?
It was necessary because the Los Angeles Police Department refused to assist in the protection of ICE agents, as well as the protests, which quickly turned into the riots because of the violent crimes which were committed, until the protests swelled to a size that were unmanageable. And that's per the police chief of the LAPD himself. And therefore, the current mission of the National Guard and the Marines, which at this moment in time, the Insurrection Act not yet being invoked, is to protect federal property, to protect the missions of those in immigration customs enforcement. We see by the judges signing these warrants for individuals who are either participating in or are harboring those who have committed very serious crimes and are also, of course, continually committing the crime of evading Border Patrol and immigration customs enforcement due to illegal immigration. So those reasons particularly, I would say the National Guard and the Marines are warranted. At this point, the situation has become too big for the LAPD to handle.
So, Mike, similar question to you. What do you think about the situation? How was the handling of the situation by California state and local authorities before Trump deployed the National Guard?
Yeah, I got to disagree with you, Tony, just only because I've spoken to a few folks that are on the ground covering this story for a bunch of different outlets. And look, I'm not even going to get into the agitation part of this. I'm not even going to get into the legal part of this of the governor or the mayor not requesting the National Guard to get there. It's similar to what you said, Don, when you framed this question at the onset of it, right? Are state and local officials in lockstep in terms of the protests? 56 people over the last 4 days have been arrested in Los Angeles. It's now, I think the total is around 64 people. There's 3.82 million people that live in Los Angeles. That's 0.00010% of the population. To deploy 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines for a situation where there's 3.82 million people that live in that city and 60 people have been arrested, 0.00010% of the population, and my math may be a little bit off because you can't get into the decimals there, have been arrested. Now, again, we're all on the same page. Violent protests, anything against police officers, violence, rocks that are being thrown. Even California Governor Gavin Newsom said it on Pod Save America this week. He said, full stop, you're under arrest. If you do that, you violate federal property. You do anything to harm or endanger officers' lives, I agree. But at the end of the day, and again, speaking to folks on the ground there, it seems that this is kind of chicken and egg, right? Trump said it before I came on in the package. I saw this in 2020. You know, Tim Walz sat on his hands. The Minnesota mayor asked for request of National Guard troops, so I decided to deploy it. He's using that as the same example here. And these are two totally different events and scenarios that are happening right now. I get Tony's overarching premise about, hey, you know, ICE agents are being under attack, or at least they're being impeded from their progress. But that doesn't change the fact that, again, 60 people have been arrested in all of this. If they're committing so much crime, why aren't more people being arrested on this? There has been nothing from local or state officials that they're being inundated by so many protests that they can't handle it, or else Mayor Karen Bass.
That was the testimony of the mayor of the LAPD, though. Like he said that on the press conference, they are inundated. Those are his words, not mine. Is he lying?
He said we are inundated. We need the National Guard, and Karen Bass is not helping.
He said we are inundated. Words, there are too many for my officers to handle. Those were his words.
Tony, that's not what I asked. I asked did he say we need the National Guard and Marines to be deployed here now because we are not getting what we need from the California governor and the mayor of Los Angeles? Did he say those exact words?
I did not make the point that the police chief had called for the National Guard. You said that the police chief, because there were only 60 arrests, that therefore that was totally enough for the LAPD to handle. He said no. You were wrong. He made that point.
But Tony,
I'm not talking about what the police chief called in the National Guard.
Tony, I'll admit that I'm wrong on that. There are 84 municipalities in Los Angeles that all have subsequent police departments. They have enough, you know this as well as I do. they have enough manpower in the state of Los Angeles to handle any type of protest. They went through this in '92, and George H.W. Bush deployed the National Guard after the Rodney King riots. None of this is rising to the level. Nobody was murdered. They're just people that are being arrested because they've overstayed their welcome here. Yeah, Tony, I can't get into, like hypotheticals. The reason people are protesting is
did you not see the concrete blocks thrown at police officers?
And I just called that 2 seconds ago that is wrong, Tony. We agree with that. Violence against police officers, full stop.
I'm talking about, you said murder, and then I responded, well, there are a lot of attempted murders that have taken place. Thank God they haven't found their mark. The cops were wearing helmets. Some of the helmets were knocked off of the police officers in question. So there are attempted murders, again, like the Rodney King riots in this particular instance. And the reason that I'm responding in this way is usually, Mike, you're very level-headed on these kinds of things. So when we're talking about the LA kind of riots, I'm a little concerned, I should say, or maybe just confused that you're not suggesting that it's a good thing that the National Guard or the Marines have been called in to stabilize the siege around the federal building, for example, or some of the other violent riots.
If state, local leaders are shouting it from the rooftops that they need the help, Tony, you know how this works. The legal part of this is that there's a chain of command. I call the National Guards, not the president supersedes. He does have the right.
That didn't stop President Kennedy or President Johnson.
What did I just say? I'm not saying they don't have the right. I'm saying state and local are saying we don't need it. You're saying one instance of one
said.
He did not. You just said it 2 seconds ago, Tony. He did not say, I need the National Guard and Marines deployed because I am overwhelmed. You just said that he said he was inundated from a resource perspective.
Yes,
he didn't blame anybody. So if he blamed Karen Bass and said, President Trump, we need help. We need the National Guard. We need Marines. I'm not getting what I need from the mayor of this city, and I'm not getting what I need from the California. And they've been radio silence about this, and somebody's going to lose their life. If he had made that same dire claim, then I'm with you. Deploy the National Guard. It's not about whether or not they should be deployed. It's about what Don just said at the beginning of this. There are people on the ground that said, hey, this was kind of tamed a little bit. And then all of a sudden, there's this threat of 2,000 or plus National Guards, 700 Marines. Now we've got a bunch of National Guard folks that are sitting here because the Insurrection Act hasn't been invoked. So they can't do anything.
National Guard troops. They're not marching down the cities quelling.
No, not a threat. Not a threat. Not a threat. No, Tony, not a threat. Sorry. Wrong. Yeah. I'm saying they can't do anything until
you're using, but
yeah.
My issue with this particular framing, no, of course, Mike. So the issue that I find with this particular series of arguments is that it suggests that unless someone in California called for the National Guard or the Marines, that it was unnecessary. When we found via leaks from Karen Bass's office that she has been slow walking, she directly superseded the incident commander of the LAPD to slow walk LAPD moving to address the developing riots. So the question is to who called the National Guard if Karen Bass, whose leadership has been atrocious through the LA fires, through the previous riots, would not call in the appropriate number of, as you said, very large numbers of LAPD officers who could have been called in. And then it gets to a situation where now the National Guard and Marines are required, which is the opinion of not just people on the ground, not only those analyzing the footage from afar, not only some in California who have expertise in dealing with riots and military actions and these kinds of things that happened in 2020. It is a necessity that at this point, order is in fact restored. And Karen Bass, and for that point, Governor Gavin Newsom refused to do so. Governor Gavin Newsom could have called in for the National Guard himself, but he didn't because he wanted to try to claim these were peaceful events when they were not. They refused to cooperate with federal authorities. The individuals they are now claiming couldn't help themselves. They were incited because federal authorities went in, as is federal law. At some point, you do have to bring in federal troops to restore order when city and state officials refuse to do so.
Okay, Mike, let me just butt in for a moment here. And of course, I want you to respond to what Tony is saying. And I want to ask you, why should there be so much pushback with sending in the National Guard when for most of the time, they're not even on the front lines? It's usually LAPD or local law enforcement anyways handling the situation.
Yeah. I mean, again, I can only go to historical references, like 6 or 7 times in our nation's history. And a lot of the times it's to protect citizens. Obviously, what happened in Little Rock and Arkansas. You know, look, Tony's not wrong about what he's saying with respect to local and state officials potentially, usurping their authority or not, telling local and state enforcement, hey, don't cooperate with some of these things, and there's leaks coming out of their offices. Okay, I get all that. What I'm saying is that, and Tony, I hope you agree with this, and I got love for you, buddy. There's a chain of command with all of this. Like there's a process in all of this. We either follow these laws or we don't follow these laws. We either follow these rules and regulations or we don't follow these rules and regulations. And so my big thing is that when we're talking about de-escalation, none of us on this panel are law enforcement experts. I'm not going to claim to be. I'm just going to tell you what I've heard from people on the ground. So when you're trying to de-escalate situations, or when you know that there are protests that are going to be happening and they have permits to be in those areas, and you try to manage the flow, as we saw yesterday in different videos across different outlets, of them trying to stem protesters away from certain areas and try to funnel them all in, right? Anybody you talk to in local law enforcement will tell you that, right? Because you want to do that because you want to make sure the population doesn't get too overwhelming that you can't handle it, right? I'm saying that we have to follow the chain of command and the protocol. That's what I'm saying, Don. And you framed the question, Don. So you started all this, Don, by the way. You framed the question with, are people on the ground saying that the National Guard being deployed and Marines potentially coming in, did that help with the agitation? Tony's saying, no, they should have been. I'm saying that I think, and again, I'm only spoken to officials. I can only count on the reporting that has come out, but also me speaking to folks that are on the ground. I don't live in Los Angeles. I live in Miami. So I can only count on people telling me on the ground, there are so many municipalities here that have so much law enforcement. There's a lot of coordination between the state and local officials, and and only 60 arrests. And again, that number may have risen by the time, I'm saying this, 60 arrests out of 3.82 million people that live in the city. So clearly, they have this situation. Again, is it fully under control? Of course not. Just like the wildfires weren't fully under control and they needed help. But is it the need of 2,700 more troops and $134 million, which Pete Hegseth just testified to, being spent to deploy these folks to Los Angeles, and them spent there over 60 days of doing all of this work, and then the debriefs, and then figuring out how to quell other protests that may stem, as we've seen 20 other states now starting to have protests? Like, was that all worth $134 million in taxpayer? I don't know if it was, if local and state officials seem to have this handled. So I want to get back to the chain of command and following the rules and regulations that we've set in place to handle these things so they don't escalate further.
All right, Tony, of course, please respond to that. And also, I want to get your view as well on President Trump and Homeland Security officials saying that protesters are being paid and organized to incite violence.
Well, I'll answer that one right off the top, and then I'll get back to Mike's assertions and rationale there. So as to the president and many of the assertions that have been made that outside individuals have, again, acted in a way that incites protests, we have seen that before. We've seen the financial records of this before. We've seen this with Act Blue in the past. I don't have any knowledge or evidence in front of me of which particular groups may or may not be involved in this particular protest, but the reason primarily is that I have been focused speaking with individuals reporting from the ground, those who are residents of Los Angeles, who are experiencing this in real time. I haven't been as focused on whether or not these are, there are paid protesters involved here, or whether or not there's outside agitation from kind of an activist network. But as to Mike's points specifically about the number of arrests correlating with how out of hand the situation was, we had footage that showed there are a lot of individuals who absolutely should have been arrested, given that they were setting things on fire, given that they were throwing rocks and other heavy devices at police, which is attempted murder, just because there were a certain number of arrests due to the Los Angeles Police Department's policy of arresting only certain individuals if there are certain conditions met during a riot, doesn't mean that equates to the level of violence and how in control or out of control it is. And at that point, regarding the chain of command, a chain of command works both ways. So if you're a lieutenant and you have a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant underneath you, who is not doing his job, you do not wait for that sergeant to come to a decision. You intervene, you place that sergeant out of command, and you take over the situation. Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass, according to leaks from her own office, are so incompetent that it was putting the lives of not only federal troops at risk due to the videos that we have on record on social media, confirmed, verified, continually occurring, but also the LAPD, whose own police chief came out and said, we're overwhelmed. We cannot handle this. And that mismanagement means that if you can't handle your spot in the chain of command, then the one above you has to step in. That's why Title X exists. That's why the president can federalize the National Guard as he has been able to do since 1940. If a governor chooses to call for the National Guard, like was done after the executive order came out in 92 due to the Rodney King riots, that is acceptable. But if it's a situation like with President Lyndon B. Johnson or President John F. Kennedy, in which the governor said, no, don't send the National Guard here, too bad. The president has the authority under law written by Congress, voted in by the people, to carry forth the federalization of the National Guard. And it's not about whether, it's de-escalated or escalated. It's whether officers are protected. It's whether order is restored. And we don't have people running through looting MacBooks and 7-Elevens and all other kinds of nonsense. That's not agitated. That's filthy, disgusting behavior, and it needs to be stopped.
Okay, we're running out of time here. So, Mike, just final thoughts.
I mean, final thoughts. I hope, Tony, I hope the Kristi Noem, what she said back in February of 2024 when she was against the Biden administration potentially mobilizing the National Guard just to stand down, and she argued about states' rights. I hope you have the same level of vitriol for that when she was arguing with respect to that, and now all of a sudden she's in support.
I did, and stated so at the time.
Okay, well, then that's it. So then you know what, Don? We agree. So there you go.
All right. Well, seems like a natural end here. Thank you very much. Tony, thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks, Don. Mike.
And coming up, the U.S. and China are meeting for a second day of trade talks in London today. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick discusses the progress. That and more when we come back.
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, please listen closely. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. It's a rate lock for your life insurance that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. Many policies you see don't have one, but you can get a lifetime rate lock from Colonial Penn. This plan was designed for people on a fixed income with coverage options that start at $9.95 a month. That's less than 35 cents a day. Your rate is locked in for life. Coverage can never be canceled, and your acceptance is guaranteed. You cannot be turned down because of your health. See for yourself. Call for an information kit and gift. Both are free with no obligation.
Call 1-800-624-6556 for your free information and your free gift. That's 1-800-624-6556. 1-800-624-6556. Call now.
I had a pretty normal mom life. Everything was pretty good, and it was a very happy life.
And we just had a new baby. And then all of a sudden, within a day or two, she's on life support and fighting for her life.
And I knew something was pretty wrong. A little less than a week after I came home, I couldn't breathe. That's when we decided to go to the hospital. I was given the diagnosis that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is basically a pregnancy-induced heart failure. They told me my only chance was a heart transplant.
And the American Heart Association helped make that possible. Their research helped save me.
This could not happen without monthly donations from friends like you. Your sustained support helps fund life-saving research that leads to medical breakthroughs, like those that gave Jen a second chance at life. Heart disease is the #1 killer in America, and we urgently need your help to save lives. Go to helpheart.org or call now to become a monthly donor today. Your donation of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, will make a difference through prevention, early detection, treatments, and cures that help save lives.
I am very thankful for the American Heart Association. I'm grateful for just every day that I get with my children.
Please go to helpheart.org or call now with your donation of just $19 a month. Join our community of monthly donors, and you'll get this limited edition t-shirt you can wear to show you're helping save lives.
One simple act today can save your life or the life of a loved one.
Please call or go online to helpheart.org. Become a monthly donor, and for a limited time only, your first month's gift will be matched.
The U.S. and China are meeting for a second day of talks in London today. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick discusses the progress.
You've been all day yesterday, and I expect you to be all day today. It's going well, and we spent lots of time together.
The delegation hopes to secure a breakthrough over export controls for rare earth minerals and other goods that have threatened a fresh rupture between the two superpowers. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said on Monday that the U.S. was likely to agree to lift export controls on some semiconductors. In return, China would speed up the delivery of rare earths. Rare earth production is high on the agenda at the U.S.-China negotiation table. Car executives are concerned that China's tight export controls on rare earth magnets essential for making cars would bring production to a halt. Here's the story.
Cars today use rare earth-based motors in dozens of components. They include side mirrors, speakers, oil pumps, wipers, and sensors for fuel leakage and braking sensors. Electric vehicles use more rare earths than combustion engine cars. Industry leaders are worried that the situation could become the third massive supply chain shock in 5 years. A semiconductor shortage wiped out millions of cars from production plans between 2021 and 2023. Before that, the pandemic shut factories for weeks. This time, as the rare earths bottleneck tightens, the industry has few good options. That's because China dominates the market. It controls around 70% of global rare earths mining, 85% of refining capacity, and about 90% of rare earths metal alloy and magnet production, according to industry data. The fate of automakers' assembly lines has been left to a small team of Chinese bureaucrats as it reviews hundreds of applications for export permits. In Europe, the region's Auto Supplier Association says several plants have already shut down, with more outages coming.
Over 120 illegal immigrants were deported to China last week. The move was part of the Department of Homeland Security's immigration enforcement efforts. ICE said yesterday that the deportees were between the ages of 19 and 68. They were placed on a special high-risk charter flight after receiving final removal orders from detention facilities. The agency says many of those deported were convicted of serious crimes, including murder, lewd acts with a minor, human trafficking, rape, and drug trafficking. ICE says the operation both enhanced public safety and strengthened national security. The Trump administration is appealing a judge's ruling last week that hundreds of Venezuelans must be given the chance to challenge their deportations. The migrants were earlier deported to El Salvador under an 18th century wartime law. D.C. District Judge James Boasberg gave the Trump administration 1 week to detail how it would facilitate the deportees' challenges. The Venezuelans were deported in March after President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to expedite the deportation of alleged members of the Trendy Argua gang. New Jersey voters headed to the polls today to pick their Democratic and Republican nominees for governor. President Trump, a part-time Garden State resident, has been a focus of the campaigns. There are 6 major Democratic candidates vying to succeed Democratic Governor Phil Murphy. Those include U.S. Representatives Mickey Sherrill and Josh Gottheimer, as well as Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. Sherrill has held a steady lead in the few public polls of the race, but by a slim margin. Baraka made national headlines when he was arrested in May for allegedly trespassing at an immigration detention center. That charge was later dropped. New Jersey Democrats have run on a platform of resisting the Trump administration's agenda. On the Republican side, former state assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli appears poised to win the party's nomination after Trump endorsed him. Ciattarelli narrowly lost the governor's race to Murphy in 2021. There's a little more time on the clock in the race to avoid a U.S. debt default. The Congressional Budget Office has updated its forecast, pushing the risk date back by 2 weeks. The CBO now says the U.S. likely won't be at risk of defaulting on its debt until sometime between mid-August and the end of September. That's about 2 weeks later than originally projected. The delay gives Republicans more time to finalize the sweeping tax and spending cuts package in the Senate. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned lawmakers last month that they must act by August or risk a default for the first time ever. Since hitting the $36 trillion debt ceiling in January, the government has used special measures to keep paying its bills. But once those tools run out, the U.S. won't be able to borrow more, setting off what experts say could be a global economic crisis if the U.S. defaults. Lawmakers are aiming to get the deal to President Trump's desk before the 4th of July holiday. House lawmakers will vote this week to make more cuts to the federal government's budget as leadership works to shore up support from those who say the cuts in the GOP's big spending bill don't go far enough. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
The first DOGE cuts that Republicans are looking at codifying is to slash around $9 billion from USAID, that is the United States Agency for International Development, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which contributes funds to news outlets like NPR and PBS. House Republican leadership this morning says they're planning to pass these cuts this Thursday, emphasizing the fact that this big budget bill now working its way through the Senate is not a one-and-done deal. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he wants to move these cuts quickly through Congress to reassure his party that they're serious about making cuts.
We're chipping away at it every day, and the rescissions vote on Thursday is an important signal. House Republicans are serious about getting our fiscal house in order, and we'll do that.
But some Republicans are skeptical of cutting funds from public broadcasting because they fear it might impact their community's ability to access emergency information, especially in rural areas. A Republican and Democrat sent out a statement saying that rescinding this funding would isolate rural communities, jeopardizing their access to vital resources they depend on. Now, Republicans are working on making these cuts through something called a rescissions package, which would allow them to make the cuts with only a majority of votes, which is a big deal in the Senate, where most legislation requires a supermajority, meaning that under the Senate's current makeup, most legislation requires Democrat votes. However, how Republicans are approaching this big budget bill and now these planned rescissions packages would allow them to pass them with only Republican votes. The White House is sending Congress several such rescissions packages, so we can expect more to come after this week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
All members of a committee that advises the CDC on vaccines are being replaced. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has ordered the removal of all 17 members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. All were appointed during the Biden administration. HHS says the appointments were designed to lock in a specific public health ideology. Kennedy called the move a necessary move to clean sweep to rebuild confidence in vaccine science. He says the new members will prioritize public health and evidence-based medicine. Kennedy in the past has argued that the committee has been plagued with persistent conflicts of interest. He accused it of becoming little more than a rubber stamp for any vaccine. Kennedy added that the panel has never recommended against a vaccine, even those later withdrawn for safety reasons. The president of the American Medical Association criticized the decision, saying the removal of all 17 members undermines trust and upends a transparent process that has saved countless lives. Senate leaders are calling for an audit over air traffic safety following the January mid-air collision at D.C.'s Reagan-Washington National Airport. The crash killed 67 people and raised questions about safety issues at the airport. Bipartisan Senate leaders for the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation are asking the Transportation Department and the Army for audits so there can be an independent review. Alongside the major investigation into the crash, the airport has run into a number of air traffic control issues and safety incidents. One of those was a close call where an apparent breakdown in communications led to a Delta Airlines plane taking off and coming dangerously close to an Air Force flyover. Following the mid-air collision in January, the National Transportation Safety Board issued urgent safety recommendations to avoid future fatal collisions in the airspace. The FAA adopted those recommendations. Coming up, 2 Israeli ministers are facing sanctions from 5 different countries, including the UK and Canada. Why the 5 nations say the ministers are inciting violence and how Israel is responding, that and more after the break.
What if kids in America didn't have to go to bed hungry tonight? What if our moms, dads, and grandparents could put healthy food on the table every day to help us grow strong? What if all of our friends and neighbors had fresh food too, and there was no hunger at all in America? And what if there was a way today for you to help? Call now or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, just 63 cents a day. So many of us don't have enough food to eat, but your monthly gift means families across the country and in your community can fill plates with food. Kids can get healthy meals year-round, even when school's out, and our neighbors can have fresh food. Food that moms, dads, entire families need to thrive. But right now, more people are facing hunger. Feeding America works from coast to coast with partner food banks, food pantries, and meal programs. It takes all of us to make that happen. Will you help too? Please call the number on your screen or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org and give just $19 a month, and we'll send you this free canvas grocery bag. It's our way of saying thank you for helping to end hunger for our neighbors. Because no kid, no mom or dad, nobody should go hungry in America. Nobody. So what if today was the day you could help nourish futures for our friends, our families, for all of us? Ending hunger is possible. What if we end it together? Call or give online today at helpfeedingamerica.org and your gift can be doubled. Thank you.
There is a road laid out for me.
Boxes everywhere. And this is going to be Addie's room.
I am blind,
You're really gonna like it.
I hope so. Yeah. I know this road is there for me. There is a long way.
First night here, but Amy seems cool.
The way it's down by the river. I am blind, but I need not see.
I got this.
I know this road is there for me.
Okay.
If I'm really free, take me down to the river and wash me.
Amid the protests in Los Angeles, California, Democrats are criticizing the Trump administration today for sending in the National Guard. Border czar Tom Homan, meanwhile, explains why he thinks it was the right move. NTD's Arian Pasdar has the reactions to the ongoing unrest in L.A.
Contra-constitutional way, he has sent the National Guard into California.
California Democrats are criticizing the Trump administration Tuesday for the response to the protests in Los Angeles. President Trump activated the National Guard and sent in Marines to stand by in case the situation becomes more violent.
Contrary to his own statement that he couldn't, of a year ago, that he couldn't send anyone in without the governor's consent.
And other California lawmakers made the same point, that the administration can't send in the National Guard without a request from the state's governor. Now, the LA protests marked the first time since a president activated the National Guard without a request from the state's governor. So why did President Trump make that move? Well, his border czar, Tom Homan, says that California Governor Gavin Newsom didn't take any action amid the violence. Watch.
Things got out of control quickly Friday night and Saturday. And the president took quick action to deploy the National Guard to protect government property that was being destroyed.
Homan then pointed to the protests in Minnesota and Portland in 2020 after the death of George Floyd. According to the border czar, Trump is trying to prevent a similar situation from taking place in LA.
I've been on the ground. I've seen the worst of the worst down here, so I'm glad President Trump reacted to save lives and property.
They're coming out. They're coming out.
So far, the Marines who have been deployed to stand by have not been activated. Homan says this might change if the protests become more violent. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
Another major attack hit Ukraine today. Officials say Russia launched hundreds of drones, killing at least 3 civilians. Kyiv is now once again calling for more sanctions on Russia.
There is nothing to wait for. Sanctions are needed now. Russia did enough and demonstrated enough. 2 empty meetings in Istanbul. It is their fault.
The spokesman says Russia launched over 300 drones and 2 ballistic missiles, which were made by North Korea, according to officials. Most of the drones were aimed toward Kyiv. But Ukraine also reports that Russia struck a maternity ward in the southern part of the country. This comes just 1 day after Ukraine reported the largest Russian drone attack since the start of the war. Moscow says the strikes are retaliation for recent attacks by Ukraine. Kyiv destroyed multiple bridges, strategic bombers, and more. Moscow and Kyiv held 2 rounds of direct peace talks in recent weeks. But the only tangible progress has been made was an agreement to exchange prisoners of war. Meanwhile, the European Commission has proposed a new set of sanctions against Russia. The sanctions target Russia's energy sector, banks, and military industry. Key measures include banning sanctions with Russia's Nord Stream gas pipelines and banks involved in evading sanctions, as well as lowering the G7 price cap on Russian crude oil from $60 to $45 per barrel to reduce Russia's energy income, and also adding more ships and oil trading companies to the sanctions list. The proposal will be discussed by European Union countries at the G7 summit later this week. 5 countries are jointly imposing sanctions on 2 Israeli ministers. That's for comments they made regarding Gaza and the West Bank. The UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway say the ministers are, quote, inciting extremist violence. Israel's foreign minister is now condemning the actions.
It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. I discussed it earlier today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
The 2 individuals in question are Israel's security minister and the country's finance minister. They allegedly commented on plans to destroy Gaza and use violence to gain control of new settlements in the West Bank. The 5 countries called the idea to create new Israeli settlements appalling and dangerous. After learning of the sanctions against him, the finance minister said that Israel is determined to continue building. The 2 ministers now face asset freezes and travel bans from the 5 countries. Amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, the U.S. announced a disruption on the financial level. Today, the U.S. Treasury announced it is sanctioning sham charity networks that are funding Hamas. According to the Treasury, several sham charities and 5 individuals located abroad are prominent financial supporters of Hamas's military wing and its terrorist activities. The agency said they were leveraging charities under the pretense of conducting humanitarian work. The agency said it's also targeting a separate fraudulent charity, one that's linked to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. According to the announcement, the ultimate goal of sanctions is not to punish, but to bring about a positive change in behavior. Israel's foreign ministry says Swedish activist Greta Thunberg was deported from Israel today. The 22-year-old's deportation comes a day after the Israeli Navy intercepted the vessel carrying her and a group of pro-Palestinian activists to Gaza. The activists had been carrying a small cargo of humanitarian aid. The group had said they wanted to raise international awareness about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel dismissed the voyage as a pro-Hamas publicity stunt. Israel released an image of Thunberg's sitting on a plane ahead of its departure for Paris before she would ultimately travel to Sweden. President Trump called Thunberg, quote, a young, angry person. The 2025 FIFA World Cup is officially starting on Saturday. The 32-team tournament will feature leading clubs from around the world. The final will be held at New Jersey, home of the NFL's New York Giants and New York Jets. Here's more.
The U.S. team is having a tough time playing well in the field. The U.S. plays Turkey on Saturday at East Hartford, Connecticut, Switzerland on Tuesday at Nashville, Tennessee. The team then heads to the CONCACAF Gold Cup. Meanwhile, several teams are already in the United States preparing to play in the Club World Cup tournament. Boca Juniors and Botafogo arrived in the United States on Monday ahead of the Club World Cup.
This competition really fills us with excitement. We know we're representing a huge club on a global level, and that gives it an extra edge. So we have to take on that responsibility and enjoy this tournament.
Argentine outfit Boca landed in Miami, where they will play Benfica in their first Group A match next week.
Boca always aims to make it until the end of the tournament. We'll have to improve gradually. There are top teams, and this tournament is very important.
The South American champions Botafogo touched down in Los Angeles. The Brazilians will play the Seattle Sounders in their first Group B match on Sunday.
It's a mythic and emblematic stadium, so it's one more fantastic experience that we will have here in the United States and in this competition. So, very good stadium, historic stadium. I want that my team could be at the level of the quality of the stadium.
The Club World Cup will have 8 groups of 4 teams each. The top 2 teams from each group will advance to the single-match knockout stage from the round of 16 to the final. The expanded 32-team tournament will be held in 12 stadiums across the United States from June 15th to July 13th.
They're not Dalmatians, but these 101 dogs were rescued from an apparent puppy mill. Someone told the authorities in Raleigh, North Carolina, that chickens on the property were living in poor conditions. Animal control officers who responded found dogs inside the unassuming home living in very bad conditions. Some of the dogs were kept in cages stacked up to the ceiling, with as many as 6 dogs in each cage. Others were wandering loose through unsanitary conditions. Most of the puppies were purebred or designer breeds like Pomeranians, Yorkies, and Doodle mixes. Some of the dogs were pregnant or nursing puppies. The rescued dogs are being checked and treated by veterinarians. They will be put up for adoption after that. Coming up, the World Bank cuts its U.S. growth forecast sharply by nearly 1% from its previous forecast, saying that higher tariffs posed a significant headwind. We'll discuss this with an economist. Stay with us.
All throughout your home, appliances and systems just wait for the worst time to break down and leave you with expensive repairs. Unless you have a plan from Choice Home Warranty.
All home appliances and systems have a breakdown clock, and when it expires, it will cost hundreds and potentially even thousands of dollars to fix or replace. That's why every homeowner should have a plan with Choice Home Warranty, like I do. For a low monthly fee, a Choice Home Warranty plan will cover your heating, air conditioning, plumbing, appliances, and more. Don't let an unexpected repair wreck your budget. With Choice Home Warranty, that covered repair is fixed or replaced for you.
Choice Home Warranty has been a great company to work with, and they've taken care of us. I would suggest anybody who lives in a home not to be in a home without them.
Avoid the ticking clock of home appliances and systems breaking down with a plan from Choice Home Warranty. Call now to get your first month free. Call in the next 10 minutes and we'll give you $120 off your first year of coverage. That's $200 in total savings.
With a nationwide network of over 25,000 technicians, I don't worry about how my next breakdown will be handled. With a click of a button, my claim is filed, and Choice Home Warranty starts the clock. They do the legwork, hiring the right technician and handling the cost of covered repairs and replacements. And check this out. For a limited time, you can get 1 month of coverage free. Did you hear me? Free. You can't beat that deal with a sledgehammer. But hurry, this offer is ticking away. Once the clock hits 0, poof, it's gone.
Don't fear the breakdown clock. Get a plan from Choice Home Warranty and get round-the-clock money-saving protection you can count on. Call in the next 10 minutes and we'll give you $120 off your first year of coverage, plus get your first month free. This offer won't last long.
Get your home protected. Call now.
Don't wait for an appliance or system to break down. Call before that happens.
Call 800-983-3523. 800-983-3523.
Hi, I'm Ryan Blaney, a third-generation race car driver. And we dedicate a lot of our time to going as fast as possible. My grandpa Lou is the reason why my dad and I started racing, and I'm really proud to follow in his tracks. But when my grandpa was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was a very unexpected bump in the road for us. I've learned a lot on this journey with my grandpa Lou, and the memories of my grandpa will always be with me. And in our family, we're used to getting involved, and I encourage you to do the same, especially when it comes to caring for your loved ones. When I think about Alzheimer's and the impact it had on my family, I recognize that losing a race isn't such a bad day after all. It's important to notice if older family members are acting differently, experiencing problems with their memory, or having trouble with routine tasks. Talking about Alzheimer's can be really tough, but if you notice something, have a conversation with your loved one. Encourage them to see a doctor or offer to go with them. Early detection of Alzheimer's can give your family time to explore support services, make a plan for the future, and access available.